This video is sponsored by War Thunder. I have made a lot of Geometry Dash icons hyper-realistic, and you've probably seen some of them at this point, but I can't do this forever. So I chose one more YouTuber to make a full set of icons for, which is going to be the last time I do this exact format for a while. And that YouTuber is going to be GeoBlitzy. So throughout this entire video, you'll see me make all of his icons hyper-realistic, and at the end, you'll see what he thinks. I'll just get in a call with him and then see what they look like in-game.
Yo! I like this one. I like this one. Wait, that's clean. That's clean.
Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe. Here we are in Photoshop, and after putting out all these files, the first one we're going to do is the cube. But the first thing we need to do is decide what materials we're going to need. So I think maybe for the left, we can use some sort of rock texture. And on the right, we could do water. I think that would add a really cool theme to this. You already know we have to exclude generative AI because it'll just give us worse stock photos for some reason. It seems like I've used some of these before, but I think we can do better. I don't know what kind of rock this is, but I do want to use it. And then we can go ahead and look up a water texture. And I just need to find one that would still pass as water, even if I put it on an icon. You know what? This might be hard, but I think I could try this one. And last but not least, he has this tooth, which I would usually use a tooth texture for, but I think for this one, I want to use a piece of flint because that could match our Earth theme a little bit more. And I don't know much about this movie, Elemental, but I'm going to take some inspiration from the water creatures and the Earth creatures when it comes to the eyes. And like always, it's best to name our files before using them in Photoshop. Once we've done that, we just drag them in, and then we can just fit them over top the areas that we need them for. I'm going to use the edge of the water because it has some more interesting parts in these bubbles. And I'm going to place the rocks in this direction because the light is hitting the right side, which is the same way that it goes in his original icon. And then of course for this piece of flint, we're just going to rotate it and then fit the top of it into that tooth slot. And because it doesn't line up exactly on these edges, I can just skew it this way and then drag out this edge while holding control. And then if I use a mask and then invert it, I can just paint it back in where it belongs using a white brush. And I'm sure you can see that that's helpful because I can also do that with these other textures. So the water, I'm going to place the top of it at the top of his head. Before we add in the eyes and then shade everything, this rock texture is looking a bit too much like an old Mario 64 texture. And one part of this I'm sure you've seen me do before, it's pushing in the edges. But the other part that I think might even be more important is going around said edges and adding in some roughness. And what that's going to do is give the rock some more depth by pushing out some of the edges of the more visible ones. All I need to make sure to do is not go outside the confines of the icon. Then I'm going to add another version of that rock texture right on top of the flint so that we can give the flint somewhere to go out of. And it'll be super easy to blend in the rock with these other rocks because they're the same texture. And we can see that it's starting to look a little bit like this icon already. But now we need to add these eyes. I'm going to try my best to just recreate them from how they look in this image. So for the one on the right, I'm going to use this earth fella as an example. And to start that, I'm going to use a white color fill layer and then use a circular brush to just click it in. And for the shadows, I'm going to use a light blue on the left, and then I'm just going to put a small dot in the middle of the eye. Now, it looks like there's a little highlight in the middle, so we can add that right here. Siri, what is the colored part around the eye called?
The colored part of the eye is called
for the iris. For now, I think we should make it gray, which we can also add right around that pupil. Now, in order to get a good iris texture, I'm going to look up an iris in Adobe stock, and I'll grab my favorite, which is definitely this one. We'll drag that into Photoshop and then put it over the pupil, where we can just use a clipping mask to put it over the gray area. Now, first of all, we're going to go to luminosity, and obviously I don't want it to be that detailed, so I'm just going to take the opacity and we're going to go about halfway. This will make it so that when we add an exposure layer and then use it to shade that iris, it'll make a lot more sense. I'll do the same with a brighter exposure layer, or I can use it for highlights on the other side. And I think I should add a slightly deeper shadow on the very edge of this eye. I'm liking the way this is looking. First, I gotta change my shirt because I'm about to melt. And you know what? I think this pupil should be a bit more dilated because the original icon has gray filling this entire circle. And I want to make that look like it's submerged under the water, but we can do that after I add this next eye. This one's gonna have a similar process, but we can just cut off the top right here. And then we can make that solid color the same blue that Geoblitz uses. I'm gonna do the same thing to this water with a color layer and adjusting these curves until it's just about the same. And I think to make this other eye, we can just copy over the pupil and drag it over there. And we can also make our iris blue. I'll give a bluish tint to that pupil as well. Shade a little bit on the left side of the iris and a lot on the left side of the eyeball. And we can also add a highlights layer for both of these where I'll just go over the top right, and using this I can also add a bounce light on the left side because light reflects everywhere and the bottom of the ocean would probably bounce up light back into the eye. I'm going to do what I did with this flint down here, and I'm going to add some rock around the eye. And I can already see that as we put these in place, it's making the eye look a lot more natural. And for the most part, I think it's good to keep the highlights on the right side so that we don't have to paint them in ourselves. To make the rest of this mouth, I feel like I could use some fish and then position them in a way to where I can kind of paint in a shadow in the shape of that mouth. I'm going to move around a little bit more, maybe shrink this one down. And then to make it more realistic, I'll paint in darker shadows underneath the fish that are closer to the ground. Let's add in some shadows for the coral, then a more flat one for the shell. Paint in some darkness underneath this crab, and then go ahead and do that same process for all these fish. But of course, course, that doesn't make it fit in perfectly just yet, so I'll have to add in a color fill layer and then turn the opacity to about 50 for now, I'd say. And if we do that for both of these, then it'll make it look like it's underwater. And now that we've put in those fish, it's making me feel like the eye doesn't fit in well enough. So I feel like I should not only add this blue layer on top, maybe make it a bit less noticeable, but I should also add an exposure layer, turn it up a lot, and then maybe try painting in the caustics that you see in water. Basically, it'll just make it look like the sun is shining down onto this eye, and it'll give it some form, I hope. And that's definitely looking a lot better. Might even try adding them on some of the fish here. Now that I've made all of this look quite passable, it's time to go and shade the other side. And I'm going to start that by adding some deeper shading on this left eye here that accounts for all these rocks that are close to touching it. I can smooth out everything and fade out the areas that are a bit too dark. Now this eye looks a lot better, and we can go ahead and move on to this flint tooth. We don't just want it to look like a drop shadow though, so we need to take into account that this middle part of the flint is going to touch this rock. So on this side we need to make the shadow softer and further out, while the middle is going to have a dark and harsh one. That flint also does have to be blue, so I'm going to color it that way. I'll balance out that color by lifting the black values. I can fix these colors by probably lightening the whole thing. I'll increase the texture to add some detail. And that's my final rendition of this icon. I'm super excited to see it in game, and even more excited to show Geoblitz, so stick around to the end to see that. Now it's time to move on to this next icon, which is some sort of jet or plane. You know what? It's kind of reminding me of something. Oh, that's right. This video is sponsored by War Thunder, and I like this plane in particular. So now I've got a bunch of screenshots of that plane, and I'm going to see if I can use them to make the icon. And while I do that, I'm going to tell you all about War Thunder, which is available for free on PlayStation, PC, and Xbox. Doing an ad read is going to add a little bit of extra challenge, so stick around to see if I can do it. War Thunder is one of the most intricate games I've ever played, and as someone who's always making things hyper-realistic, I was especially impressed with how detailed and realistic the graphics are. In this game, there are over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from all over the world. And there aren't just new vehicles either. There are even biplanes from the 1920s. I don't think there's enough texture on there, so I'm going to add in some more. You all know that I love being able to customize the games I play, so it's good news that War Thunder has a customization system with tons of camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all kinds of vehicles, even community-created ones, which is my favorite part. Now I'll get the shading here. It's looking really cool so far. Also, you might be wondering if a game so realistic could even run on your system. Luckily, War Thunder is so optimized through its Degore engine that you can even get a lag-free experience on lower-end machines, while keeping those incredible visuals and high frame rates. They even let you choose between mouse and keyboard and controller, which is nice. As a Geometry Dash player, I know what it's like to deal with hitboxes that don't have the right shape. Obviously, look at this spike hitbox. So I was amazed when I found out that in War Thunder, every vehicle is intricately modeled down to its individual components so that the hitboxes fit just right. They even have hitboxes for the engines, fuel tanks, weapons. You see what I mean. It's crazy the amount of effort that went into making this game so realistic. And luckily for you, getting into War Thunder is as easy as clicking my link in the pinned comment or the description. The cool thing about getting into this game right now is that new and returning players that haven't played in 6 months get an insane bonus pack. And these include premium vehicles. On top of that, you'll even get this Eagle of Valor decoration, 100,000 silver lions, which is the currency in game, and 7 days of premium, which gives you all kinds of bonuses. It's only available for a limited time, so don't miss out. Definitely looking interesting, but I do want to add some bolts here to put it all together. And I think those made it look a lot better, so make sure to click the link in the pinned comment or the description to download War Thunder. It'll help me out more than you think. So let's move on to the next icon. Next in the line is Geoblitz's ball icon, and this part kind of looks like a blender, but I'm not sure how to deal with that, so maybe for this icon we can do some sort of tool theme. These are shaped like hammers, there's a circle in the middle that could be some sort of screw, and overall the back of it kind of looks like a saw blade. So let's gather those ingredients. This saw blade's the best I can find. Let's try this hammer, and here's a little collage of some screws we could use. Of course we renamed them, and it's time to drag them into Photoshop. So now I will size this up, probably take one of the more symmetrical screws. I say this one in the middle, and then this hammer is just going to go over the gray areas, I think. So I'll just make the handle bend a little bit. And I understand that this is looking quite goofy right now, but I've fixed worse, so I know it'll turn out just fine. I realize I'm also going to need some wooden circle in the middle. So for some depth, maybe I'll just look up a wooden sphere. And I like this one, so let's take it, put it in Photoshop, remove that background. Then we can use that as our center point. Now that I've done that, I want to complete our little contraption by making these hammers go into the wooden ball at some point. And I'll just do that by rounding the edges. But I'm also going to have to fix the shape of this saw blade in the back. First, I'll line them up with the corners. Maybe I can just take away the blades that we don't need, then do that for every side. Now that I've done all that, let's see how that looks. Honestly, not that bad. So let's go ahead and rasterize that layer, apply the layer mask, and then I can use Liquify, my favorite tool, to just push out the edges and line it up with the icon. And while I'm doing this, I see that some of the lines are going to look a little bent out of shape. That's why I'm here to use some shading to cover it up. Speaking of shading, it's time to get to it. So first, let's blend these hammers in with the wooden sphere that we added. Because I don't know where else to put it, let's imagine that the main light source is coming from the top left. So first I'll just paint in this shadow completely dark, and then take a softer brush and fade out the edge. And just to make it more interesting, I'm going to pretend that there's also a light source coming from the right, just not as strong. That's going to leave us with two shadows, so one going this way as well. This one's going to be a bit lighter. And now I got to go do this for every hammer. Then we'll have a completed weird ball of tools. I also got to do a similar thing under this screw. Of course, on top of this screw as well. I should even do it on the inside here, just to add some depth if nothing else. I've done those, so it's time to get to shading this final hammer, which just like the other ones starts with a shadow that gets softer as it goes out. We also have a soft shadow on the left, and then we shade the bottom right side and a bit on the left. The thing I want to do is just brighten up all the shading just a little bit so that some of these details are a bit more visible. Now we can do a big shadow that the ball would be casting and an overall shadow on the bottom right. Now it's getting a little muddy, so I feel like we should use some highlights to brighten up what's on top. We can do it on the screw, on this hammer, this one, the one on the left, and even this saw blade on the bottom should have some, which leads me to the next way that we can add some contrast, and that's the colors. Because on the original icon, they look like this, and right now we have that. So put a solid color layer on top of this screw, make it blue, and set it to color or hue. And for those color layers, we might need a few, because that saw blade also needs one, although it is looking askew. I'm just going to go through and erase these until they touch the hammer, and then make the sides cleaner. And that should fix our issue. Now we have quite the interesting contraption, and something I still need to do is add some shadows underneath these hammers. Luckily, I can just transform the hammer selection and then feather it by, let's say, 50 pixels. Now I can just fill in my selection, set that to color. I feel like I still need to add some depth on the edge of this saw blade here, and then add some slightly softer shadows on top. Okay, so I kind of feel like these hammers are not the right shape, so I'm going to take the original icon, and I'm just going to trace this outline. It might be a little sloppy, but it's okay, because you'll see my reasoning here. Then once I've selected the entire thing here, I can just go ahead and hit selection, look up a little paint splatter texture, then using that selection I'm gonna mask that splatter texture. Now hopefully if I roughen up the edges a little bit with a painterly brush, I can make it look like maybe there was some sort of sticker or something, and make it more understandable what the original icon looked like. I don't know if that even made it better, but I give up. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, so we've gotten 3 of the icons done so far, and next up is going to be this robot UFO. Let's just jump right into it, starting with a metal texture. And I've used flatter brushed metal textures in the past, so maybe I should try something like corrugated metal this time around. To get started on this, I'm going to use a line of symmetry, and then paint the texture in using a layer mask. So I'm going to hold Alt, click and drag on that layer to duplicate it, unlink that layer mask, and now because that layer mask is unlinked, I can drag around this texture, and it'll look separated from the other one. And to make that line of separation even more prominent, I'm going to use the shading layer, and I'm going to move a selection of the right layer. Then all I have to do is just paint in a dark shadow there, go through and erase some parts to account for the height. I'm even going to raise the shadow in places like these. And right here, add a slightly softer shadow over everything. And then we have some metal plates that look like they're put together. But you know what? We have another use from those screws from the last one, because we can use them to show that these two plates are connected. So first I'll just place them in where I think they look best. Then using Liquify, I can just cave in the area around them to make it look like the screw actually did something. Add highlights to the screws, add highlights to the other metal, add some depth to the edges. Now we have a pretty realistic looking set of metal sheets here, but we do need to add in the eyes. And luckily for the eyes, I have this LCD texture that I can just distort on both sides, and I gotta warp it into an arch. And I'll just color it in over that using the icon's eyes as reference. Put another layer that's white underneath. Then I'll set them to something like overlay on some glow on top. I don't want to make it look like that glow is bouncing off the edges here. We can also add some depth to the metal sheets by shrinking down a layer underneath it. And I'm super happy with how that depth made it look, so let's move on to these side areas. And I'm thinking in this robot, there could be some sort of junk like plastic that was put onto the sides here. And I think it would be really funny if that plastic was some sort of pail. This sort of thing is exactly what I'm looking for. Let's put one on this side, copy it to this side, also give him a mouth here. Okay, so I've shaded these buckets. I even added some extra texture on there and the metal, and I kind of thought that those screws weren't standing out enough, so I made them blue. And now all we have left is the glass on top and the metal parts on the sides. So for the metal parts, I'm trying to find a large bolt like this, and this one looks like it'll fit in great. So I'll just name that real quick, put it into Photoshop, hit remove remove background. And you know what? Maybe I should stretch it out to fill up the entire box here. I'm gonna fix the shape of it using liquify. Then with the bowl under that pale layer, I can go ahead and put it on the other side as well. And then all we have left is that glass dome on top. For that, I'm gonna reference our first icon by grabbing a fish bowl, flipping it upside down, removing the pure white, and then of course warping it into the shape of the dome. Now it's kind of hard to see on this transparent background, so let's add a solid color in the back, and then warping it into place, which is easier said than done when it's so translucent. I'm just so happy with how this one turned out, and I can't wait to see what Geoblitz thinks at the end of the video. And now it's time to move on to my favorite game mode, the wave. Okay, the next icon we're gonna make is another bomber plane. Okay, the last one was very simple, so naturally we're going to do an extremely complicated one next, and that's the robot. So I have it open in Photoshop here, and I'm taking a look at what I might need. Maybe I could make it some sort of hybrid between a mechanical dinosaur and a normal one, because just looking at it, it kind of seems like the gray parts would be some sort of metal. So let's speed through this real quick. We're going to need metal. Ooh, I do like the welds on this one. And then we'll need a horn. Chameleons can have horns. Whoa. This one's a little weird, but I want an elephant foot for the toenails. And I want a close-up of a crocodile's eye. Lastly, we gotta get some reptile scales, and I like this one a lot. And while I'm naming these files, I would really appreciate it if you could go down and hit the subscribe button. We're almost to 50,000, and you can always unsubscribe if you change your mind later on. I really appreciate it if you do. It helps me more than you could imagine. Let's drag these into Photoshop, place them where I think they'll go, and obviously this horn doesn't match up perfectly, so we can use puppet warp. We just pin this side, put a pin in the other side, and then we can drag it to that location. And if you hold Alt while using puppet warp, you can then turn it till it twists around. Some things puppet warp just can't fix, so you gotta use old reliable. It's looking good, so let's use warp, put it right into this horn shape, then we can just copy that over to the other ones. This one here is a really wide horn, and this is actually a tooth, so let's be a little bit different. Let's take this shark tooth, flip it upside down, remove background. To make it more clean though, let's select the outside, hit this button here, and hit contract selection. If you just contract it by 1, invert the selection, and then paint that little outline away using a black brush, and when you hit apply layer mask, it'll have a much cleaner edge than before. And sometimes people ask me where I learned how to do any of this, and it's all from YouTube. So if you're ever watching something like this thinking, I could never do something like that, give it a try. I promise, the more you practice, the better you'll get. Okay, anyway, let's invert that mask and then just paint in the tooth where it needs to be. Flip this around, super high quality image of a crocodile here. Let me just paint out the eye and then invert the mask. Now we have the eye by itself, which I can grow and then fit it into that eye socket. Again, we'll invert the mask and do my favorite thing, just painting it right back in, only in the areas where we need it. Next up, let's put in this bottom jaw, which I'll first just draw it in here, then give it some form using liquify. And it doesn't matter if that overlaps here just a little bit, because for the upper jaw, we're gonna need this welded texture. And I don't know where to start with that, so first I'll go to liquify, do that same thing where I just wrap it around the edges. So for this edge, I'm gonna let it hang off a little bit more. Paint that in where it needs to be. It's already looking pretty cool to me, but we gotta warp this tooth up, put the metal underneath those horns, and then put the eye on top too. But this icon has a weird eyebrow on top, so let's use our other welded texture. And I wanna grab just this part where there's a nice rough seam there. Do I wanna meticulously go through and erase around the weld? Yes. That took 5 minutes. So a little less than I expected. If I kind of line this up with the eyebrow, and then I can rasterize the layer and apply the mask. And hypothetically, I should be able to use puppet warp again, pin it on this side and right here so that we can bend the metal. We'll take this end off here. And I also want to add that welded look around the eye too. Let's do puppet warp again and just bend it around that eyeball. Do a tiny bit more meticulous work. Then yeah, I think that works pretty well. Of course, at this point, you know, shading's gonna make this look a lot more complete, so just stick around for that. But until then, we can do the thighs, the leg, the foot, which is actually kind of a weird shape to get in here, but I think I can make it work. And then finally, we can move on to the shading, which just so happens to be probably the most important part of this. And just for these scaly textures, I'm gonna add a blend if where the underlying layer pops through just a little bit in the brighter areas. And that'll just keep its texture and add some shininess to it. And you can see that it just keeps it glistening even when there's shadow all over it. I have this jaw overhang a lot, and after selecting this tooth, if I drag it down a little bit and then transform the selection, then I'll just warp it into place. And then if I feather it a little bit, it, it'll leave me with an outline of that tooth, because obviously the tooth also has to cast a shadow. Speaking of the tooth, let's add a shadow to the top of that, and the sides. Let's add a harsh shadow underneath this weld. Smooth it out a little bit, but keep it really dark. And then I want to make it look like the eye is a little bit deeper into the head. Let's put a super bright highlight up here too, which you can warp around the eye, and then fade it out to make it a little more realistic. Maybe if I made it bigger like this, that also means I need to fade it out up here where the light wouldn't be hitting. And there we go. That's a nice subtle detail to make it look more round and wet. Let's add shadows to this weld, this weld, this weld, this weld, and this weld. Underneath the eyebrow, there would be less light. Same goes for these horns. And that leaves the top of this head to reflect all that light. Now these horns are looking out of place, so let's fix that. And I guarantee you it'll already look way better the second we just add in a shadow at the bottom of each one. Can't really say I was wrong there. I'm gonna add some sharp highlights in the middle of these horns to give it some roundness. And don't worry, I haven't forgot about those colors just yet. We're gonna add those after we've done all the shading. And I kind of want to keep this horn flat, as if it's maybe some flat plane in the middle of his head. I'm just gonna keep my shading very consistent throughout the entire face of the object. Then for the highlights, we'll imagine that this is the back plane and this is the top. It's just gonna get a little bit of light. Shade the bottom of the thigh area, whatever that is. And let's put a really dark shadow where it connects with that weld. And for the shadow coming away from these horns, we want to make it go along with the contour of the metal. The top is going to get some shiny highlights here. And finally, we can do this horn. Go down here too. Wait a minute. I just realized that this foot needs to have metal plating over it. So I don't think any welders are watching, but I'm sure if they are annoyed at how terrible my welding strategy is for this. I just want it to look old and thrown together, I guess. So now we have this entire thing done except for the colors. So let's do that real quick. Alright, that's the robot icon. I'm always super happy with these ones because they're always so detailed, but we still have two more icons that are even more detailed, to be honest, before we show Geoblitz his new set. Arachnid hour, 8-legged era. What I'm trying to say is that we're going to make his spider now. And it looks like the spider is going to be a pretty fun one right here. And we're also going to be making 2 cubes today. Just like the last one, it looks like we're going to have some metal textures here. But we're also going to need some blue sheeting on top. I'm going to keep the metal texture from last time, but for the metal sheeting, I want to try something different. I have an idea. How about denim? Denim is blue. We're going to have some sort of jeans spider right here. I'll pick this one for now. And luckily for the cube on the inside, I've already made one of those before, so it's going to be pretty simple to put it in there. This might be a bit of a stretch, but maybe there's a vent on the back here with these 3 lines. Probably as simple as one of these. And I'm going to interpret this as 2 headlights on the front of our spider. Maybe we can just take this one and make it vertical. Name all of these and drag them all into Photoshop. First, I'll put these metal sheets on there, but you've already seen enough of these, so we'll skip through that. And 1 hour later, we have all of this metal sheeting down, and I can finally move on to the denim. And yes, for that cube, I modified the realistic Rob Top icon from the last video. So the first thing we have to do is put this reference on top. That way I can see where all these blue parts are. And then I'll take these denim textures, and I want to make them a little bit bigger so that you can see the texture from a distance. And then we can get to doing some patchwork here. Going back to liquify, and we are forming the denim around each blue area. And for each one, using a white brush on this layer mask, I can draw in the textures. To save a little bit of time, I'll warp it naturally first, but really liquify is doing the job here. Let's draw this one in too. And then we have to do this weird front flap here. And for this one, I'm not going to use liquify as much because it looks like a much more rigid shape. So instead, I'll just take a piece like this, skew it to the side by holding Control and Shift. Then we can do some magic by taking another piece but skewing it the other way. Now, when we draw this one in, it'll have a texture going the opposite way, which when shadows are added, looks like a prism. Pretty interesting, right? Let's move on to these 2 headlight looking things, I guess. Clearly the front is some sort of bent surface, but they're just hovering over it as if it's not. So I will put them in like this, but then I'll apply the layer mask, take the top half first, and then I'll skew it left. Then I'll do the same down there. Now they definitely match up with the perspective a bit more. And because of how they're set in there, I feel like we could make it look like they're inside of the metal. And as long as we keep the direction of the light in mind, we can draw in pretty convincing shadows. And it'll just look like it's giving us a little peek into the denim on the inside. Do that, and then highlight the other side where the light would be hitting. I think that's pretty good, but I'm starting to wonder how hard it would be to move the metal into the insides so that it's actually 3D. Okay, never mind. That was actually really easy. So let's move on to these shoulder pads. And these should be pretty simple as well. Just do some dark shading on the left side and some highlights on the top right. But these will also cast a shadow onto the metal, so let's do that. And these should be pretty simple. Just a harsh shadow coming out the back and soft shading around these edges to make it look like it's contacting the denim. All right, now we have that and we're almost done here. And you might be wondering what we even have to do. It's the glass on the top. Oh, and that vent. I forgot we also got headlights as well. And all I really need to do is crudely cut out the top here. And I'm just going to take this texture from it. I'll flip it around, stretch it out a little bit, cut off the bottom, flip it vertical, put it on the bottom, and then skew it. And I'll skew the top as well. And if I just use a clipping mask and put it on top of there, we have the headlight texture, and we can set it to something like hard light. Looks pretty good, although screen actually seems to work the best. Then with a blend diff, we can kind of get rid of the darker values. And we turn the opacity down a little bit. And if I just put it on the other side as well, those headlights are finally finished. And like I said, there's one more glass thing to put in, but the vent's going to be really simple. Just put it on the back here and warp it a little bit, and then paint out the parts we don't want. And I'm just going to put it under the shading layers. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so the last thing we have to do is put glass over this guy's head. And call me crazy, but I think a cake stand might actually work. But I'll just take the most square looking one, which is this, set it to multiply. I'm going to remove the lightest parts of it. And on another layer, I'll remove the darkest parts. And now with the original as our reference, we just stretch it out, warp it a little bit, and then finish it off with a little bit of liquefy. I think those highlights are in a good spot, but they're a little bit too harsh. So I'll just kind of select the inside here and erase the front highlight. There's one thing I could still do, and that's put a reflection of the bottom. And I do have a bit of a sneaky way to do it. I'm just going to screenshot the bottom here, flip it upside down, put it in the reflection, then just kind of fade it away until it looks right. This one looks great to me. I love how it turned out, and I love how the denim works in with it, even though it's kind of a weird choice there. But that leaves us with just one more icon. Finally to the last icon, and it's time to do the swing. And what does it look like we'll need? Probably a wizard hat, some bulbous marble looking eyes, and some sort of skin texture. And I can't find any good wizard hats, so maybe we'll look for a leather texture instead. I do like the look of this hat. We'll take that. For the eyes, maybe we can find some white marbles. This might be an interesting texture to use. I think actually for the skin, we could just do it ourselves. And what I mean by that is making a solid color layer one more time, and using that exact color to paint in a circle. With my files named, let's drag them in, put them where they go. Because I don't want the marbles to look exactly the same, I'm going to take a remove tool and just remove different parts of them. And now that they look different enough, we can move on to this hat. And with the hat, I think I should use warp first. Do I even need to say what I'm going to do next? If you haven't caught on yet, it's liquefy. Alright, I don't know how I managed to do this, and I don't even know if you could call this managing, but I warped that thing into oblivion. Although I do think this is looking pretty cool already. Now I didn't get thrusters, but that's because I've already done thrusters before on this icon. So I'm literally just going to stick those on the back here. And to put them back to their original color, you can just go to black and white. Now that we have all the pieces in place, we can go ahead and for the last time shade this thing. And I'm going to start with the eyes because spheres are generally the easiest thing to shade. We're going to imagine that the light source is in the top right, just like the last icon, and that way the shadows are going to be on the bottom left. Also going to add in a harsh bounce light on the edge here. With those creepy eyes in place, let's do the skin next. And because something's touching it really close, we're going to have a super harsh shadow in between them. Now with those general shadows put in, we can do a harsh shadow underneath the eyes. On the original icon, there are super sunken in eyes, so I want to emulate that same feel here. And that bounce light was fun to try on the marbles, but I just don't think it really fits here. And I think this looks way better. So we should also add some highlights in the top, middle, and maybe even on each marble. That's looking pretty good, so let's do this hat now, which should also be very simple. We just have to make sure that there's a contact shadow in between it and the face. And I really got to make sure that there's a big highlight on top to make it readable as a hat. Before we add the mouth, let's put some soft shading underneath the thrusters, and then highlights on the back because there's going to be fire coming out. Alright, so now we need this mouth. And what I'll do to make it is use the pen tool, draw this entire thing, and then all I need to do is put a shadow underneath it, and then when I deselect it, it'll look like a mouth. But then if I select the inverse of it, I can also add shadows to these teeth looking things above. With it being the only untextured thing, I feel like I have to add some sort of texture in there. And because I'm completely lost on that, I'm just going to look up texture. Textute. Texture. 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 Textuet. Texture. Okay, there we go. A kind of grainy stone texture might work well because we did use stone a few times already. I'll warp this texture a little bit, but I'm not going to do too much extra to it, except of course switching it to overlay. And I've also added that indent in the top of the hat here, and we can get on to coloring this whole thing. So for the hat, first I'll select the top here, and then we'll make the top that dark blue. Because the original has no belt up here, I kind of want to make it serve as the outline. So I'm actually going to remove the color from the belt, then I'll turn the exposure down in the darkest parts. Finally, the bottom of his hat is this brighter blue, and if we set that to color, it doesn't exactly do the job, so we also have to turn up the exposure in that layer. Just turn it up a lot. Now that it matches the color, I kind of have to fix some of these parts that it made a bit too bright, and I'll do that by removing it on the layer mask. That worked pretty well. The bulbous eyes need to be as bright as possible, and then finally the thrusters on the back need to be a lot darker. I really like how this one turned out. It was nice and easy, and here's what the original looked like. I can't wait for Geoblitz to see this one, but luckily I get to show him tomorrow.
All right, let's do it.
Let's see.
Bang. Oh, heck no. Wait. I'm looking at the right side. Why does it look like an aquarium?
It
Like,
is.
there's like coral. Oh,
There are
I didn't
fish
know
in
I was
there.
built like that. Okay. There's fish in me. There's fish inside of me.
Oh.
What? Okay, so we got rocks, geologic, geoblitzy, ship time. All right, going for a little metallic, more like a space shuttle type beat. I like the depth. Let's check out that ball. Yo, it's like they're hammers. Oh my god.
This is a ball of tools.
Ball of tools. Yeah, I'm a big fan of hammers. I like beating people. What do we got here? Yo! I like this one. This one's cute. All right, let's check out the dart. That's what we call them. We call them darts.
Yep.
Another ship. Yeah, it's like a fighter jet of some sort.
Like a bomber, a stealth bomber, maybe.
Like a stealth bomber.
Now to the good ones.
Okay, here we go. All right, we got our creature here. It's also very metallic. I was expecting more like bonely. This is more mech-like. It's like a mechanical robot. I do like this. All right, spider.
I don't know if you noticed, but the blue is actually denim.
It is. Adam! Wait, how does that even... That's so strange.
I ran out of blue things to use, so I was like, maybe I could try jeans, dude.
He's just wearing pants. All right. Ooh, this one. This one got the hat on.
Yeah.
Got the hat on. Yo, he's the wizard. Majestical, mystical even. All right, let's play some levels. I'm just feeling the jumper vibes. It's so weird without the glow, because I've been using glow for about 7 years, maybe, something like a long time.
Especially with the like fracture on the inside. There's actually an open space. Oh.
We got a guy here.
He
doesn't have cool icons.
Dude, the ship actually works.
The ship looks good. It looks pretty seamless. Okay, something that's all well-rounded. I'm gonna go with like Theory 2. All right, we have this guy chasing me. All right, so I really like this guy. I really like that one.
That actually looks so good. This one's stupid.
Hammer swipe. Wait, that's clean. That's clean. It's working.
I'm so happy with this one.
This one's probably my favorite, honestly. In motion, at least. All right, here we go. Let's see this guy in motion. Yo.
Oh my god. What other icon haven't we done?
The dart.
Oh, you're right. The dart,
why did I call it that?
It's kind of like a bird's eye view.
True. Wait, that's actually cool.
I like this one. The dart. Dude, you got me saying.
Oh my god, I got you saying it. That's the next thing. That's the new thing. We're all gonna
start
be calling it
the
dart. All right.
Okay.
Yo, everyone who watches this video can call it dart from now on. All right, here we go. Geometry dash. Yo, wait, this one's fire. This one's fire. Check that out.
Thank you so much to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox for free using my pinned comment or the link in the description. Again, new and returning players who haven't played for 6 months get a massive bonus pack to start them off right. Don't miss out on the most realistic game I've ever seen. Please just download the game. I would really appreciate it. It would help me so much. Link in the pinned comment or the description.